Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and we have a super exciting video for you today. I'm joined by Jake. How you doing today, Jake?
Doing well, thank you.
And as you probably know, Jake does the Playing Pauper series. That's kind of one of his things. He plays Pauper, I think, way more than anyone else at the Goldfish site. And one of the hidden aspects of sets like Modern Masters, and we got a new one coming out very shortly, Modern Masters 2017, is while most people are excited about the reprints and the fetch lands and expensive modern cards, these sets actually shake up Pauper quite a bit because cards get downshifted in rarity. So, Jake, overall, how much of an impact do you think Modern Masters 2017 and these rarity downshifts will have on Pauper?
All right, well, hold on to your hats. We're not going to have another Paragon Drake-like change like we did in Eternal Masters. Nothing from this set that got downshifted is going to get banned, and I'm like more than 90% sure of that. We do have some stuff that's going to upgrade existing decks, some that may spawn entire new archetypes, but I don't think we have anything that's completely out of this world. But we have a lot of solid small upgrades here and there that I'm excited to talk about.
All right, so what we're going to do today is basically go over the top 10 new to Pauper cards from Modern Masters 2017. However, there are a total of 22 cards that are new to the Pauper format. So before we get to the actual top 10, we're just going to take a couple minutes and briefly go over the other 12 cards. I guess these would be our honorable mentions. So I'll let Jake handle most of this part. What do you think about the honorable mentions, Jake? Starting with Graceful Reprieve.
All right, so this is just an honorable mention because there's already a card that does this better. It's called Angelic Renewal. It's an enchantment, so you can cast it ahead of time, and it lets you return something for 1 and a white. So, and also the enchantment synergy there is pretty good, whereas this is an instant. It's harder to get back and recur, so I think there's already something better than it, and it doesn't actually fit in the Angelic Renewal deck because you don't need that many effects that are like that. Don't worry if you don't know what the Angelic Renewal deck is, because I think I've faced it like one time lifetime. It's not very popular. It's not very good.
Have you played it on Playing Pauper?
Oh, I have not, and I probably never will unless it becomes much better than it is now.
Oh, okay. So this is like
I'm okay
tier
with
3.
playing like 2-3 decks, but decks that have like an expected 0.5, maybe 1-4 value, I try to stray away from.
So against the odds, Pauper edition.
Exactly.
Next on our list, Pitfall Trap. Is this another one of those cards where maybe there's just a better option available already?
Yeah, Pauper is more powerful than you might first guess since it's all commons, but we have Journey to Nowhere in the format. So it doesn't have to be during combat. It can hit something with flying. It's only 1 mana more. I mean, if you want good removal in white, you're going to play Journey to Nowhere. And there's also Oblivion Ring, other options like that. Pitfall Trap is too situational.
All right, so a little too conditional. How about Cower in Fear? Kind of a mass removal spell, sort of?
Right, so there are enough small creature decks in the format that Shrivel fits into some black control deck sideboards. And Shrivel is a sorcery, whereas Cower in Fear is an instant. So this new card can be fetched by Mystical Teachings, which is an upgrade. I don't think it's enough of an upgrade that you would want it over Shrivel, because the upside of Shrivel is that it comes down so early and stops those aggressive decks. And finding double black and finding 3 mana is a lot harder for Cower in Fear, but it could show up in sideboards.
And next up we have Grasp of Phantoms. Putting creatures back on top of the library, even with flashback, is that something that makes it good enough for Pauper or not really?
So this is just, it's not efficient enough. It seems cool, but we have Chainer's Edict in the format. It's less for the upfront cost, less for the flashback cost, and it gets rid of the creature permanently instead of putting it back where you have to deal with it again. It could potentially be in like a Forbidden Alchemy deck that likes the flashback, likes putting things into its graveyard for value, but I don't think it's efficient enough to keep up with this format.
All right, moving on to our next slide, we have some more honorable mentions. Slime Molding? Is making a big green creature good enough?
Well, it's an X spell, so it makes you want to get X as large as possible, but if you want to get X as large as possible, you're playing Tron, which means you have color fixing and you're playing red, and you're just going to go with Rolling Thunder and kill your opponent. So this isn't good, this isn't efficient when you're casting it for X's 2, 3, or 4, and if you're talking about something crazy like X equals 20, there are better mana outlets.
So next we have Scourge Devils, and this one is interesting to me because this actually sees a bit of modern play to get it back in a dredge deck and pump up your team. Is there any potential of something like that in Pauper or not really?
Pauper has much better like 3-mana pump spells and pump spells on creatures and ways to pump up your creatures. And the most effective aggressive red decks are generally goblins, so you have ways to pump up goblins specifically. I don't see a deck that both uses its graveyard and is aggressive being able to do those things together in conjunction in Pauper.
Next on our list, we have a somewhat expensive, I guess, sack outlet in Scorch Rusalka. Is this something that could go in like an Aristocrats deck, or just not powerful enough for what it does?
So Aristocrats generally isn't red in Pauper because it doesn't really have a reason to be. I played a black-green version that was pretty fun to play a couple weeks ago. You can look up. And this card alone is certainly not enough to make you want to play red. Having to pay 1 mana for this happening each time is pretty awful, and only dealing 1 damage, well, you could just attack with that creature, and presumably it has greater than 0 power. So I was trying to think of combo potential. I don't really think there is one. I think it's just too expensive for too little of effect. Just attack with the creatures if all you want to do is 1 damage apiece with them.
Yeah, it seems like with the Aristocrats type decks I've played, not specifically in Pauper, even paying 1 mana for the sack effect is often really prohibitive. That adds up a lot when you're trying to sacrifice multiple things in a turn.
Yeah, exactly. The free sack outlets is really what you want.
Next, we have a really aggressive Rakdos card, Spike Jester. Is there Rakdos Beatdown? Is that a thing people do in Pauper?
There's supposedly a Rakdos burn deck that plays Bump in the Night, along with other spells, but I don't even think they play creatures. And as you know, going from 0 creatures to 1 or 2 creatures is not a great idea because it turns on all your opponent's removal, and also they can just block this, if they have any creatures at all on the table. So I don't think this alone is enough to spawn a black-red aggressive deck. It's not a great color combination. And
you mentioned Goblins a minute ago. That's probably mono-red in Pauper?
Yeah, Goblins is basically always mono-red, and it's fast enough that I think it would delay your win condition by a turn or 2 to add a second color, but you could certainly try it.
Okay. Moving on to our last bit of honorable mentions. Next, we have Gift of Orzhova. So when I saw this, it made me think Boggles. Anytime I see an aura, I think Boggles. Boggles, I know is a thing because you played it. Is Gift of Orzhova going to be a part of that moving forward?
So Gift of Orzhova looks like it does a lot of different things, and it certainly does, but you have to think about the other things Boggles already has. Ethereal Armor, which gives you +1/+1 for each enchantment you control, and it counts itself. So that's minimum +1/+1. Usually it's like 5 in this deck. And First Strike. And First Strike is more important than Lifelink in a deck that's trying to win quickly. You also have Rancor, which is one of the best auras ever printed. You have Armadillo Cloak, which is absolutely absurd for winning races and gives you that lifelink that you want with a +2/+2 pump instead of +1/+1. So I think as splashy as Gift of Orzhova is, there's just too many more powerful options that you probably will never play in Boggles.
Fair enough. Next we have a removal spell that makes me think kind of a ramp deck, since it wants you to have a lot of lands. Is that something that has potential in Ground Assault, or not especially?
Flame Slash. That's it. It's all you really have to say in response to Ground Assault is Flame Slash. If you're playing Ground Assault, it would only be because you're already playing for Flame Slash, or for some reason you're playing a deck that is so slow and good at getting lands onto the battlefield that you expect to have 5+ lands all the time. And if you're running a control deck in red-green, you have to ask yourself why you're not running a Dimir control deck, or is it control deck, or something that's, can actually play counter spells and is much better at controlling the game.
All right, our last 2 honorable mentions, we have Revive, which is an effect that's all over the place. I have to think that over the history of Magic, there's probably a better Revive out there at Common, or am I mistaken? Yeah,
the favored one right now is Pulse of Marasa. It's usually favored by Tron because it can hit lands too, and it gives you the 6 life, which is good against aggressive decks. Revive, only being able to hit a creature, not offering any additional utility, it doesn't really help any existing decks in the format. For example, you wouldn't play it in Stompy. You wouldn't pay 2 mana just to get back a dumb Stompy creature. You certainly wouldn't play it in Elves. You wouldn't play it in Tron over Pulse of Marasa because you can afford that extra mana in Tron almost all the time. So, and it's certainly not a powerful enough effect to spawn an entire deck by itself. So it's kind of a utility card, but I wouldn't expect it to pop up that much.
All right, our last honorable mention, Gnawing Zombies. So here's a card that screams aristocrats, and you said green-black is the color. However, 2 mana to sack the creature. Is that going to keep it out of decks, or does it have a shot?
Yeah, the 2 mana is even more awful than 1 mana, as you might imagine. So you want to sacrifice multiple things in a turn, you're not going to be doing anything else, basically. And then, this doesn't even offer that much value. Target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. I mean, if we're going to be paying twice as much mana as the Scorch Ruzalka, you'd expect to get twice the benefit, and gaining 1 life does not equal twice the benefit.
Alright, so those are the bad cards from Modern Masters 2017. Some of them, as Jake said, may show up here and there, but the cards we're really excited about are coming up next. So, number 10 on our list, and we've talked about aristocrats a couple times so far. Mortician Beetle, downgraded all the way from rare to common. Is this finally a card that's actually going to show up in the Aristocrats list?
It will. I don't know if it'll be enough to make Aristocrats like Tier 1. It might make it a solid Tier 2 deck. But yeah, get those Read the Bones out. Get that Bone Splitter out of the list I just played. Maybe even cut like a Brindle Shoat for the 4th one of these. And throw it in there, and I think it would be really good. Additionally, this doesn't only count your own creatures. So throw Chainer's Edict as your removal of choice. And you can get +1/+1 counters for removing your opponent's creatures as well.
Ooh, that's actually pretty sweet. It seems like, as a 1-drop, it's going to get pretty big pretty quickly if you are built around it. And I'm assuming that this effect is fairly new to Pauper. Like, you probably didn't have anything really close to this in the 1-drop slot for a sacrifice-based deck, right?
I mean, you have the Carrion Feeder, which gives you the +1/+1 counter every time you sacrifice a creature. It gives it to itself, and it's also your sacrifice outlet. But this allows you to double up on each creature sacrifice. So if you have 1 Carrying the Feeder and 1 Mortician Beetle, then you're getting 2 counters every time you sacrifice something. And of course, if you're sacrificing something like a Young Wolf that you can sacrifice twice, then that doubles it up again. And you just try to keep on getting those, synergies in there until you can attack with a bunch of like 6 +1/+1 counters on all your 1/1s.
Moving on to number 9 on our list, we go from Black Aristocrats to Green-White Beatdown. Call of the Conclave, the token Watchwolf. Is Green-White Beatdown a real thing in Pauper? Or does the token aspect of this card matter? What do you think about this one, Jake?
So I don't think the token matters at really all that much. The problem is that there is not a Green-White aggressive deck, unless you count Slivers, and obviously Call of the Conclave doesn't make a Sliver token, so it doesn't fit in there. Could this make a different Green-White deck viable that rivals Slivers and is better at attacking? I don't think so, just because Green-White color combination isn't as aggressive as some others, but potentially if you stick a Kozali Pride Mage in there, then that's kind of like a 2-mana 3/3 by itself. Call of the Conclave is obviously a 2-mana 3/3. White has some cheap removal in Sunlance and Journey to Nowhere. Green obviously has a lot of aggressive creatures. You could steal some from the Stomping list and try it out. But I feel like if you're going to go Green-White aggro, Slivers is still going to be the way to go. And based on that not being a Tier 1 deck, I don't have super high hopes for the new Call of the Conclave deck.
Next on our list, we move to the blue cards, and this is one of my favorite because it says draw a card on it. Tandem Lookout. Where does this one fit, or does it fit, Jake?
Well, the first thing you do when you check these cards is you know that Wizards never would ever put something on this and not say combat damage nowadays. But guess what it does? It just says damage. So the way I'm thinking you use this is you play a Thermo Alchemist, and then you play your Tandem Lookout. And then you tap your Thermo Alchemist, and you draw a card. And then you cast the instant or sorcery that you just drew with Thermo Alchemist, and you untap your Thermo Alchemist, and you tap it, and you draw a card. That is how I'm looking to combo off with Tandem Lookout. Whether that's reasonable, I don't know, but I think I would want to try to build a blue-red deck around that synergy and see if I can work it out. I don't think in like a normal deck, Tandem Lookout beats something like Ninja of the Deep Hours, which allows you to rebuy your end of the battlefield effects and still get your trigger, and it's a 2/2 instead of a 2/1, so it doesn't die as easily. But in the Thermo Alchemist deck, where you can give that trigger to something else with Tandem Lookout, I think it could be something fun to build around, and it might actually even be good.
Well, speaking of combos, our next card is something that I think you envision as part of a combo deck. Falkenrath Noble from uncommon to common. So, Jake, why don't you explain to us how this combo actually works?
All right, so the combo doesn't actually need Falkenrath Noble. So you start with the Carrying Feeder that we previously mentioned. That's your free sacrifice outlet. And then you use the combination of Ivy Lane Denizen and Safehold Elite to continue sacrificing the Safehold Elite, which has Persist. And it comes back with a -1/-1 counter, but then Ivy Lane Denizen puts a +1/+1 counter on it and cancels it out. So you're left with the same exact creature you had before. So you can sacrifice it an infinite number of times. The problem with that is then your carrying feeder is infinitely large, but it can still be chump blocked. It can get removed by something like a Journey to Nowhere, a bounce spell, something like that. FALKENRATH Noble allows you to combo off and win on the spot without having to do anything additional. So it's a 4-card combo, which is, not great. However, all of these cards together could form a deck that doesn't need the combo, potentially. So you could build like a slower version of an Aristocrats deck, put in some sacrifice synergies. FALKENRATH Noble could just be a beater in the air, and then if you happen to assemble all 4 pieces, then you win. There are other slow control decks that have more control options, and this would need a lot of different pieces of the deck dedicated to the combo, but it is something to think about, and it's something that you could try to put together.
So this is like a Blood Artist effect. That's the card I refer to when I think of this. Is this the only Blood Artist effect where whenever a creature you control dies, you get to drain? Is that the only one in Pauper now? Is this a new effect to Pauper?
So I did look this up previously. If you want to actually drain your opponent, yes. You can do Death Greeter, which is 1 mana, but it says whenever another creature dies, you gain a life, which obviously doesn't kill your opponent. So it's not very useful. I guess you could gain infinite life with it. And there's also Vengeful Dead, but it also costs 4 mana, and it only works for zombies. So yeah, you're not getting cheaper and also being able to drain your opponent for each creature dying.
Interesting. Well, it's always exciting when potentially powerful effects, like this affects he's playing other formats. So it's always exciting when a card like that enters a format, because it seems like there's at least some potential of a new archetype or a big improvement from an old archetype when you get a unique and powerful effect like that. Next on our list, we have GRIXIS Slavedriver, a big finisher for a black deck, perhaps? What do you think about this one, Jake?
Yeah, basically, it's got the graveyard synergy because you can dump it in the graveyard and unearth it. It's obviously got some raw power because you get a body and then you get another body and then you can flash it back for another 4 damage and then another body. So it's got a lot of staying power. The problem is if you're running a graveyard deck and you're running black, Gurmag Angler is a 5/5. It's bigger, which means it blocks 4/4s like Mirror Enforcer and other 4/4s. The 5/5 is a big upgrade. It also dodges Flame Slash, which is nice. But GRIXIS Slavedriver does have a certain appeal to it. It doesn't eat up your graveyard if you want to leave things in there. A lot of different bodies are more resilient to removal. So I'm not sure exactly which control deck could use this as a finisher, but I could see it being one.
I remember last time we did one of these, and I don't remember the set it was, but there were several cards where Gurmag Angler was the answer to why they were not quite good enough.
Yeah, Delve is OP.
Next on our list, we have a blue-black control card, perhaps, DINROVA Horror. So what do you think of this one, Jake?
All right, I'm going to tell you something, and then I'm going to judge your reaction, okay? I put a DINROVA Horror on the battlefield and then another on the battlefield, and then I cast Ghostly Flicker targeting both of them. You're my opponent. What do you do?
All right, wait. So, do you just, lose your entire board?
It comes pretty close. So basically the amount of value you get from this, even the first time it comes down, is pretty sweet. It's kind of only, it's not really you're not really getting 2 things because returning to hand, they can cast it again. But if their hand is empty, you deal with something permanently. And if their hand is empty and you flicker this and something else, or you flicker this and another copy of it, you're going to start devastating your opponent's board state. There's no way they're going to be able to keep up. So obviously, the problem with that is, well, what could we be doing that's better than DINROVA? And guess what the most popular creature in the format is? Mulldrifter. So it's hard to beat flickering Mulldrifters, but if your deck needs a little bit more top end for the Dimir Flicker deck, I could see DINROVA Horror being added as a 1 or a 2 of, and just being absolutely devastating against control decks and decks that can't survive long enough to escape the wrath of this horror.
It's also worth mentioning that it's any permanent, so you can go after your opponent's lands too. So it's kind of like destroy 2 lands if you have the double flicker thing going, if your opponent's empty-handed. So it seems like that could be pretty powerful in some matchups as well.
Yeah, it's definitely powerful. The question is Pauper going to be slow enough to allow you to play 6 mana to play these to be able to flicker them and get away with all that nonsense? And the answer is I hope so, but I'm not sure.
All right, so let me ask you, Jake. We're moving on to the top 4 cards on our list, and you know Pauper way better than me. Looking at this list, I would think that these 4 cards are pretty far above the rest of the cards. Like, is this the cream of the crop as far as new cards?
Yeah, these are the 4 that people are going to be very surprised if they do not show up in 5.0 lists over the coming weeks when this becomes legal. The rest of them, maybe they'll be minor upgrades, maybe they'll spawn new decks, maybe, but these ones are ones that I think most people are pretty sure are going to show up somewhere or other.
All right, well, next on our list, number 4, Magma Jet, a modern/standard worthy burn spell entering Pauper for the first time. So how does this one work in Pauper, Jake? Is this just replace other burn spells, or does it do something more than that?
So I'm not a burn expert, but it definitely could be in burn over something like a Searing Spear. We still play that. So if you scry a land to the bottom, that's like drawing a card in burn. If you scry 2 lands to the bottom, that's like drawing 2 cards. So that scry 2 is obviously very powerful. You don't want any blank draw steps in burn because you cannot afford them. Additionally, you can use this in more controlling decks that value the scry even more. Ones that really want to find the right distribution of lands and spells, like is it control decks that actually need some of those land drops, so they really need to know what they're drawing. So that's a potential just as like a value spell. The problem is if you're not running this in any deck that's not running Lightning Bolt is the problem. So the question is, it's not like the scry is so good that you're going to pass up the value of 1 mana, 3 damage. So you have to ask yourself what decks are already playing Lightning Bolts, and do they have enough room in their deck for more burn that they want the Magma Jets as well?
Yeah, all right. I will say, as far as burn, and I'm not a burn expert either, but it might seem counterintuitive. You mentioned, I think, Searing Spear could be a card that would get replaced. It might seem counterintuitive to remove a 3 damage spell for a 2 damage spell when the goal of your deck is just to burn your opponent out. But really, if you consider the value of the scry, you're actually getting more than 2 damage out of Magma Jet when you put a land to the bottom and draw another action spell. So it actually adds up to probably more than 3 damage of burn as far as going to your opponent's face, even though it obviously won't kill a 3 toughness creature like something else would.
Right.
Number 3 on our list, a blue card, one of my favorites. Oh, I played this card so much in Standard back in the day. Augur of Bolas, sort of a Omen Speaker, Seagate Oracle. Where does this fit in the cheap blue things that draw you a card, Pantheon and Pauper?
Yeah, Pauper loves their blue cards that draw blue creatures that draw cards. Muldrifter is the number 1 most played, and Seagate Oracle is the number 2 most played creature in Pauper. So Augur Bolas, same stats as Seagate Oracle, 1 mana less. The only problem is, do you have enough instants and sorceries in your deck? So, for example, Mono Blue Delver, if they cut out their Ninja of the Deep Hours, I looked at a deck that ran 3. If you cut 3 for 3 Augurs, you have about a 78% chance to hit at least 1 instant or sorcery in your top 3 cards and be able to draw something. Now, that doesn't sound like absolutely incredible, like 22% of the time you're missing, but what percent of the time do you have a Ninja of the Deep Hours in your hand and nothing to ninjutsu in? Because Ninja of the Deep Hours has a fail case too. So the question is Augur of Bolas better than that? So maybe the answer is yes, maybe the answer is no in Mono Blue Delver, but in other decks that aren't attacking as much, Augur of Bolas is a clear upgrade over Ninja of the Deep Hours and a potential upgrade or side grade or in addition to Seagate Oracle. So it definitely has a lot of potential in control decks. There are lots of good instants and sorceries to grab. Counterspell is legal in the format, for crying out loud. So I definitely think we'll see Augur of Bolas showing up in some capacity.
So is this something you'd play in a Mystical Teachings type deck that normally doesn't play many or hardly any creatures? Like, could this have a home in that type of deck or not really?
So Dimir Control, there's a lot of variations. It has a history of sometimes being creatureless, in which case you would not put in the Augur of Bolas to turn your opponent's removal on. Sometimes they just play Muldrifters. Sometimes they play Muldrifters and Seagate Oracles. There could be a version coming up that plays Augurs only or Augurs and Seagate Oracles. It's really a question of exactly what type of cards you have in your deck and how you want to set it up, whether you're winning with Evankar's Justice or whether you're planning to deck your opponent. There's a lot of really good Dimir Control tools. So it's just exactly how you want to set it up. Augur of Bolas definitely has a clear amount of power level, and the fewer creatures in your deck, the better, since it only hits instants or sorceries. But I will not claim to be a deck building genius and know exactly how the best list is going to look like when it's finalized.
Well, moving on from the world of slow control decks to one of the most aggressive burn spells maybe ever printed, potentially 5 damage for 1 mana, where do you see Thunderous Wrath in Pauper, Jake?
I don't know. I just don't know. So a lot of people have been really excited about this card for burn. And I'm not as sold on it, but I'm definitely obviously going to mention it. So here's the problem with it in burn. How fast do you think burn wants to win? Burn generally wants to win before turn 7, okay? Almost all the time. Which means you're drawing fewer than 7 cards per game on average. Which means you're more likely to have a Thunderous Wrath in your hand and uncastable than top decked and usable for 1 mana. So this gets a little bit more complicated with something like Needle Drop, which draws you additional cards, lets you get through your deck a little bit faster. Or Insolent Neonate, sometimes burn decks play that helps you filter through your deck. And can also discard a Thunderous Wrath that you drew naturally that you can't miracle cast. So I think if it is played, it's going to need to be in combination with maybe Insolent Neonates, so that you don't just have a completely dead card in your hand when you draw it in your opener, so you can do something with it. However, if you do top deck it, and it does work like you want it to, you're getting almost 2 lightning bolts for the price of 1. Like, this could make you win like a turn earlier on average every single game that you draw one of these. And if you draw 2 of these in the same game, that's half your opponent's life total with 2 cards. That's absolutely insane. So I think it could be played in burn, but it would take a burn expert and aficionado to meld the deck in such a way that you maximize the number of times you can miracle it and minimize the number of times it's rotting in your hand, because you're almost never getting to 6 mana with burn.
All right, last but certainly not least, and I'm kind of surprised that they printed this card at Common, Burning Tree Emissary, a card that you can just kind of dump 1,000,000 copies out on the battlefield as soon as turn 2. So where does this free 2/2 fit in Pauper, Jake?
It doesn't fit in Pauper at all, okay? Which is funny because there's a lot of red, there's a lot of green in the format, but the red-green decks don't want it. It doesn't want to be in Tron, obviously. There's a Red-Green Madness list that's kind of fringe that I played a while back. It doesn't want to be there. However, unlike Call of the Conclave in green-white, red is a much more aggressive color. So I think Burning Tree Emissary, and a lot of other people are saying this and have said it first, is aggressive enough to make a red-green deck possible. So take Stompy, cut out some of your double green spells, cut out some of your weaker things, throw in Burning Tree Emissary, maybe throw in Keldon Marauders, Scab Clan Mauler, Horned Kavu, some other good 2-mana red cards that you can play off the Burning Tree Emissary, and you can obviously also play things that cost 1 in the green off of it as well. Throw in your Lightning Bolts, obviously, and just there's your aggro deck. So I don't know exactly what creatures you want in there, but despite there being no red-green aggro deck that exists right now, Burning Tree Emissary is explosively powerful enough that it might create one.
So you think there's a chance that this is going to create an entire new archetype in Pauper? That's how potentially good this is.
I won't say right off the bat that it's definitely going to be better than Stompy or other existing aggro decks, but I would be very surprised if it's not a very solid tier 1.5, tier 2 deck that comes about.
So is this the only card, out of all of the cards we talked about, and some of them have a lot of potential from what we've been saying, is this the only card that you think has potential to do that out of Modern Masters 2017? Just like, here's a brand new deck in the format.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the power of dropping a Burning Tree Emissary into another strong 2-drop, or the 2 Burning Tree Emissary hands, which is not unheard of. It's not like a crazy thing. Oh my god, you can't have 2 copies of the same card in your opening hand. Like, just being able to go Burning Tree, something else. Like, people who played, Standard back when Burning Tree was a thing know about this.
Yeah.
It could definitely be enough to power an entire new deck. And it's not like red and green are lacking. Stompy is obviously already a tier 1 aggro deck. And Lightning Bolt is not a bad card to add to aggressive decks, believe it or not. So I feel like red-green is in a good place to be able to have that deck. And I think Burning Tree Emissary will push it over the edge.
Oh, well, Jake, that's been our top 10, along with our honorable mentions, new to Pauper cards for Modern Masters 2017. Any final thoughts on anything we've been talking about on the way out the door today?
Thank God they didn't reprint Peregrine Drake again.
So nothing that broken. Burning
Right.
Tree Emissary isn't to that level, you don't think?
Correct. I'm glad that they're using these sets and these downgrades to introduce new things to Pauper. I'm glad that that's happening because while Pauper is fun right now and it's in a good place now that Peregrine Drake is gone, it's always fun to have more experimentation as well. But I don't like it to artificially, put cards that should be as powerful as rares in the common slot just because it's a master set. So things like Peregrine Drake can stay far away, and things like Burning Tree Emissary, DINROVA Horror, Magma Jet will gladly take those on because the format is powerful enough to handle those.
And I think if there's one good thing to come out of the Peregrine Drake debacle, I guess, if you want to call it that, is Wizards did show that they were willing to pull the trigger and ban it. So hopefully, if we do get in that situation again, they will do it and do it even quicker this time, because things got a little hairy there for a while in Pauper, where I know you stopped playing because of Peregrine Drake. So
yeah, it was a little bit nuts. And guess what? It's similar to Peregrine Drake. The only card similar to Peregrine Drake in this list. It's the number 1 Burning Tree Emissary. It's a free spell. Now, I don't think it's going to be, abusable like Drake was, but I'm excited to see where the red-green aggro deck exactly goes. I know a lot of different people will probably be trying different variations on it, and I'm eager to see what comes out of the gauntlet and hopefully try my hand at 1 or 2 myself.
So coming up on Playing Pauper in the future, a red-green Burning Tree Emissary list?
Either that or trying to flicker 2 DINROVA Horrors at the same time. I'm not sure which one I'll convince myself to do first.
Well, both of them sound pretty sweet. Anyway, everyone, that's all for today. So that's been our top 10 new to Pauper cards from Modern Masters 2017. Thanks to all of you for hanging out and watching it. Big thanks to Jake for taking the time to do it. And we will be back with another one of these in the future. So we will talk to you soon.
All right, see you next time.